Welcome to all the late night listeners. You are listening to True Horror Vault. On this podcast, we bring you terrifying tales of real experiences claimed by actual people. Some of these events found logical explanations, while others remain shrouded in mystery to this very day. Tonight marks the beginning of our special series, 5 True Horror Stories from America's Desolate Mountains. We usually know mountains as peaceful, beautiful, and quiet places. But when the sun sets, when the fog rolls in, and when the last cell phone signal disappears, those very same mountains hide secrets that no one can explain. Our first story tonight was submitted by a listener who wished to remain anonymous. This event took place on a remote trail in America's Appalachian Mountains. Even today, they say, if they had looked back even once that day, they wouldn't be here to tell this story. Story 1. The Mountain Voice That Belonged to Me. I've been hiking alone for years. I loved desolate mountains. The silence of the trees felt much more comforting to me than the noise of the crowd. 3 years ago, in late autumn, I set out alone to trek a lesser-known trail in the Appalachian Mountains. A local elderly ranger looked at my permit and offered just one piece of advice. Make sure you get back down before dark. I smiled and replied, "Don't worry." He didn't say anything else. He just looked at me as if he knew something I didn't. The morning was beautiful. Clear blue sky, crisp cool air, and a forest covered in orange and yellow leaves. I was steadily making my way up. After noon, I realized I had drifted slightly off the main trail. Not too far though. My GPS was still working. I decided to walk a bit further and then loop back to the main path. But in the mountains, saying just a little further can invite disaster. I learned that the hard way that day. By late afternoon, a thick fog suddenly swept in. Within minutes, everything turned white. I couldn't see more than 5 or 6 feet ahead. I pulled out my GPS. A message flashed on the screen, signal lost. My heart sank a little. Still, I kept my calm. I pulled out my compass and started heading downhill. Right then, I heard the sound of footsteps in the woods to my left. Thinking it was another hiker, I called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" No answer came. The footsteps stopped instantly. I started walking again. A few seconds later, the sound returned. This time on my right. It felt like someone was keeping pace with me, tracking me in parallel. I stopped. The sound stopped. I walked. The sound walked. This went on for about 10 minutes, and right then, I heard my own voice. "Hey." I froze. The voice was unmistakably mine. Same pronunciation, same pitch. I heard it again. The voice was softer now. "I'm you." My hands and feet were going numb. Just then, my eyes caught the cracked mirror inside the cabin. And what I saw in it, I have never been able to forget. In the mirror, I was standing there. But behind me, someone else was standing too. He looked identical to me. Same clothes, same backpack, same face, except his smile was not human. Slowly, he tilted his head inside the reflection, and without moving his lips, he whispered, "Now come outside." I spun around in terror. No one was there. I looked back at the mirror. I was standing alone. At that exact moment, 3 heavy thuds rattled the cabin door. Bam, bam, bam. Then complete silence. I sat inside that cabin all night. When dawn broke, I opened the door. No one was outside, but on the soft mud, there were clear footprints. Not one pair, 2 pairs. One was mine. The other matched my shoe size down to the mill. Down to the millimeter. Both sets led up to the cabin. But the footprints leading away, there was only one pair. I somehow stumbled back to the main trail and reached the ranger station. After hearing my story, the old ranger stayed silent for a long time. Then he said quietly, "In these mountains, people sometimes hear their own voice. If that voice ever calls out to you, never go toward it." I asked, "Why?" He looked out the window at the fog-draped mountains and simply said, "Because not everyone who returns as the same person." Dear listeners, the hiker who returned from that Appalachian cabin still says that the scariest thing in the mountains isn't wild animals. It's your own voice. Now let's move on to another remote mountain range in America, where an old fire lookout tower was decommissioned decades ago. Yet, they say when night falls, someone is still keeping watch up there. Story 2. The Last Watchman of the Lookout Tower. This happened about 5 years ago. At the time, I was working as a wildlife photographer. I had traveled to the Rocky Mountains in Montana for a few days to take pictures. After shooting mountain landscapes all day, the weather suddenly turned in the late afternoon. The sky darkened. Lightning began flashing in the distance. Checking my map, I saw an abandoned fire lookout tower nearby. These towers used to be used to spot forest fires, but this one had been decommissioned for years. I decided to take shelter there until the storm passed. The tower stood right at the peak of the mountain. The timber was weathered and old. Every step groaned under my weight as I climbed the staircase. Reaching the top, I found a small room surrounded by glass windows, a broken table, a dust-covered chair, and a rusted telephone hanging on the wall, one that shouldn't have been functional for decades. I dropped my pack. Right on cue, rain began to pour outside. The storm was so fierce that going back down was out of the question. I knew I had to spend the night there. It was around 11:30 p.m. Suddenly, the phone rang. My heart plummeted. Impossible. There was no active line connected here. After a moment of hesitation, I picked up the receiver. On the other end, just static, a low rushing sound. Then a faint voice murmured, "Is someone up there?" I replied, "Yes, I am." A few seconds of silence. Then the voice said, "Don't look out the window." Click. The line went dead. I stood there holding the receiver for a long time. I thought maybe, somehow the line was still live, but I couldn't brush off the chill in my chest. Right then, on the window glass, very softly, tap, tap. Two sharp taps. It sounded like someone tapping their finger against the glass. I slowly turned my head to look. Nothing. Just pitch blackness. And rain. I sat back down on the chair. Less than a minute passed. Tap, tap, tap. This time on a different window pane. I flashed my light toward it. Nothing visible. But as I pulled the beam away, two wet handprints appeared on the glass. As if someone was standing outside, pressing both hands against the window. My throat went dry. I slowly backed away. Just then, across all the windows simultaneously, tap, tap, tap. The knocking erupted everywhere. It sounded like dozens of hands battering the glass at once. Terrified, I collapsed to the floor. Suddenly, the phone rang again. With trembling hands, I lifted the receiver. Same voice, more frantic this time. "Don't look at them. They want you to open the window." I screamed into the mic, "Who are you?" After a pause, the voice answered softly, "I am the last watchman of this tower." The line went dead again. Then, all the knocking stopped. A silence fell so deep that I could hear my own heartbeat thumping against my ribs. Mustering my courage, I stole a quick glance out the window, and the sight I saw keeps me awake to this day. Below the tower, shrouded in fog, dozens of human-like silhouettes were standing. None moved, none spoke. They were all just looking up at the tower. I couldn't make out their faces, but I knew with absolute certainty they were waiting. For what? I do not know. I didn't go near the window for the rest of the night. I sat huddled on the floor until dawn. At the first light of dawn, I stepped outside. Just mountains, wet grass. Nobody there. No footprints either. Only countless dried, smudged handprints on the outside glass of the windows. I made it down the mountain and reported everything at the nearest ranger station. An elderly ranger sat quietly for a long time. Then, he pulled an old black and white photo from a desk drawer. It showed a man wearing an old fire lookout uniform. I froze when I saw the photo. The man's face matched the voice I had heard over the phone. The ranger said softly, "He was the last watchman of that tower. He disappeared in a blizzard nearly 30 years ago." I asked with a shaky voice, "Then who spoke to me last night?" The ranger stared out the window toward the distant peaks and said, "Maybe he's still keeping watch. Because some towers close down, that some shifts never end." Dear listeners, after hearing the story of that old tower in the Rocky Mountains, a question might cross your mind. If someone is truly still keeping watch after all these years, who or what are they guarding against? The mountain itself, or something hidden deep inside it? Our next story comes from a former forestry worker. He kept this story to himself for years, knowing most people simply wouldn't believe him. Story 3. The mountain where someone flutes after sunset. This happened in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. Back then, I worked as a temporary employee for the Forestry Service. My job was to monitor an old mountain trail where tourists frequently got lost. Most were eventually found, but some people vanished without a trace. On my very first day, my senior gave me a warning. If you hear a flute after the sun sets, never walk toward it. I laughed it off, thinking it was just a prank to scare the new guy. For the first few days, everything was normal. I patrolled the trail, talked to hikers, and took photos of wildlife. Then, on the evening of the 5th day, everything changed. Just before sunset, an eerie silence settled over the mountain. The crickets stopped chirping. The birds went quiet. Even the wind died down completely. Right then, a distant flute melody echoed through the trees. It was a very short tune, just 4 notes. Then silence. I stood there listening. A few seconds later, the same tune played again, closer this time. The hairs on my arms stood up as my senior's warning rushed back to my memory. I quickly pulled out my radio. "Are you hearing that flute music?" Instantly, his voice blasted back through the speaker. "Get down here right now. Don't stand there for another second." I began hiking down the trail briskly, but no matter how fast I walked, the path seemed endless. A bend that should have taken 5 minutes felt like it was shifting further and further away. Suddenly, from deep within the dense pine forest to my right, a quiet voice whispered, "This way." I froze. The voice was familiar, unmistakably familiar. It was my younger brother's voice. My heart skipped a beat. Impossible. He was hundreds of miles away at home. I didn't answer. I forced myself to keep moving. Then, the flute melody stopped. Then, silence. I stood there, listening. A few seconds later, the same tune played again, closer this time. The hairs on my arms stood up as my senior's warning rushed back to my memory. I quickly pulled out my radio. "Are you hearing that flute music?" Instantly, his voice blasted back through the speaker. "Get down here right now. Don't stand there for another second." I began hiking down the trail briskly, but no matter how fast I walked, the path seemed endless. A bend that should have taken 5 minutes felt like it was shifting further and further away. Suddenly, from deep within the dense pine forest to my right, a quiet voice whispered, "This way." I froze. The voice was familiar, unmistakably familiar. It was my younger brother's voice. My heart skipped a beat. Impossible. He was hundreds of miles away at home. I didn't answer. I forced myself to keep moving. Then, the flute melody stopped. In its place came the sound of a child laughing. I picked up my pace, almost jogging. Suddenly, I felt someone walking right behind me, keeping perfect pace with my steps. I took a step. They took a step. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. The back of my neck felt ice cold. I spoke softly into the radio. "I think someone is following me." A few seconds of dead air. Then my senior's panicked voice came through. "Listen to me. No matter what happens, do not look back. If you look back, we will never find you." I broke into a full sprint. Right then, someone whispered right into my ear, "Just take a look." Tears welled up in my eyes. I could feel whoever, or whatever, it was, standing directly behind me. I could feel its cold breath, but I didn't turn around. A few agonizing minutes later, I spotted the lights of the ranger station in the distance. I'd burst through the door and slammed it shut, collapsing onto the floor. My senior handed me a glass of water and asked, "Did you look back?" I shook my head. "No." He let out a heavy sigh. Then he pulled an old file from the wall cabinet, a file packed with missing hiker reports going back decades. Almost every single report had one detail in common. Statements from surviving companions read, they answered a voice calling them, or they followed a flute sound deeper into the woods. As I went to close the folder, a vintage photo caught my eye. My blood froze. Standing alongside several rangers in the photo was a man who looked identical to me. Same face, same eyes, even a small mole on his right cheek in the exact same spot. The date stamped at the bottom read, 1978. Trembling, I asked, "Who is this?" My senior stared at the photo for a long time before answering quietly, "We don't know. We only know that every few decades in these mountains, someone shows up who looks just like you." I didn't ask any more questions. I quit the job that very day. To this day, whenever I hear the distant sound of wind whistling through the night, I hold my breath. Because I know That call wasn't meant for me. Yet, something out there is still searching. Dear listeners, there's a common saying in the mountains: not all paths are on the map. Some paths only open up for those whom the mountain decides to claim. Our next story comes from a former mountain rescue team member who swore that after this event, he never went up a snow-covered peak alone again. Story 4. The cabin that wasn't on the map. This took place in the Cascade Range of Washington State. I was part of a mountain search and rescue team. It was midwinter when word came in that 2 young hikers had gone missing. Their last known GPS ping was logged on the northern slope of the mountain. A team of 4 of us set out before evening to begin the search. For the first few hours, we tracked their boot prints in the snow. But then, something strange happened. The 2 sets of tracks just stopped. It looked as though both hikers had simply vanished into thin air off the surface of the snow. Our team leader muttered under his breath, "This isn't right." Just then, in the distance, we saw a warm yellow light glowing from the window of a cabin. We were baffled. There weren't supposed to be any cabins in this sector. None showed up on our maps. Still, amidst the rising blizzard, the light was clear. We pushed toward it. When we knocked on the door, it creaked open slowly. An old man stood inside. White beard, heavy wool coat, eerily calm eyes. He simply said, "Don't stand out there. You'll freeze to death." We stepped inside and sat near the fireplace. The interior was surprisingly warm, with a fire crackling in the hearth. But something felt off. There was no food anywhere in the room. No water, no signs of daily life. It looked as if no one had lived here for years. The old man turned to us and said, "The ones you're looking for? They took the wrong turn." Our leader asked in surprise, "How did you know who we're looking for?" The old man didn't answer. He just stared out the window. A moment later, I noticed several old framed photos hanging on the wall, showing various rescue teams from different eras. Suddenly, my eyes locked onto one frame. Standing in a group photo was our current team leader. Same face, same age, same gear. The date written underneath, 1982. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I took the photo off the wall and showed it to him. The color drained from his face instantly. He whispered, "Impossible. I wasn't even born yet." The warmth inside the cabin began to plunge rapidly. Our breath turned into thick white clouds. Just then, the old man spoke in a low voice. "Night has fallen. No one leaves the mountain now." The moment he finished speaking, all the lights went out. I quickly clicked on my flashlight, and what the beam revealed made my body go numb. The old man was gone. In his place sat an old wooden rocking chair, slowly swaying back and forth. Yet, the cabin door was still bolted from the inside. How could he have left? Suddenly, a voice drifted in from outside. "Help us." A human voice, weak, shivering. We threw open the door and rushed out into the snow. Lying in the drift were the 2 missing hikers, alive, but severely hypothermic. We evacuated them down the mountain. What they told us at the hospital still echoes in my mind. Both hikers insisted an old man sheltered us in a cabin. He told us to wait there until the rescue team arrived. We looked at each other in disbelief. Because the next morning, we hiked back to that exact spot. There was no cabin, no fireplace ashes, no porch. Just deep snow and countless old pine trees. Back at the ranger station, an elderly veteran worker listened to our story and pulled out an old logbook. An entry from nearly 40 years ago read, "A rescue worker had gone missing during a blizzard. He was last seen standing outside a wooden cabin. That cabin was never found again." Even today, when blizzards sweep through those mountains, locals say if you see a yellow light glowing in a distant window, do not go near it. Because not all lights are lit for the living, and not all shelters belong to this world. Dear listeners, tonight we've heard 4 mountain stories where every person eventually made it back, but none of them returned quite the same. Our final story tonight comes from a former wildlife researcher who spent years studying remote regions in the Rockies, until one single night forced him to leave the mountains forever. Story 5. The Shadow That Didn't Fade at Sunrise. This took place in a remote sector of Rocky Mountain National Park. I was conducting research on mountain wildlife movement and had received permission to camp solo in a backcountry location for 3 days. The first 2 days were completely uneventful. I set up camera traps, took field notes, and heard deer and elk moving outside my tent at night. On the afternoon of the third day, every animal seemed to disappear at once. I had never experienced such a deafening silence in the woods. No birds, no breeze, no rustling leaves. Only the sound of my own breathing. As darkness fell, I lit a campfire. Right then, I spotted a figure standing on a distant slope. It stood completely still, seemingly staring straight at me. I waved. No response. I assumed it was another hiker, but when I raised my binoculars, my hands began to shake. The figure had no face. Where its head should have been, there was only darkness, as if light couldn't reach it. I rushed into my tent and pulled out my satellite phone. No signal. As the night wore on, the figure seemed to get closer. But I never saw it walk. Every time I looked away and looked back, it was simply closer than before. Around 1 a.m., my campfire unexpectedly went out. Pitch blackness enveloped the campsite. Then, heavy footsteps outside the tent. 1, 2, 3. Someone was circling my tent. I went to switch on my flashlight, but stopped. A low voice spoke from right outside. "I'm lost." It sounded like an old man. I stayed quiet. After a moment, the voice spoke again. "Please, just look at me once." Suddenly, my grandfather's words echoed in my head. He used to say, "If someone asks for help in the woods at night, check their shadow first." I slyly peeked through the gap at the bottom of the tent zipper. In the moonlight, I could see a pair of boots, but there was no shadow. The trees cast shadows. My tent cast a shadow. Only that figure had no shadow whatsoever. Cold dread paralyzed me. I closed my eyes and sat motionless. Then, all sounds stopped. When morning light broke, I stepped out of the tent. No one was there, but imprinted on the soft dirt were large footprints. They led directly up to my tent door. And then, there were no tracks leading away. It was as if whatever came had dissolved into thin air. I packed up my camp in record time and headed down. When I reported the incident at the park office, a veteran ranger sat in silence for a long moment. He then opened an old logbook containing reports spanning 50 years. Every report shared one eerie similarity: spotting a faceless figure in the mountains late at night, a figure with no shadow. The ranger said softly, "We don't know who or what it is, but everyone agrees on one thing. Those who answered its call were never found alive." I never spent another night alone in the mountains after that day. Even now, when I see photos of mountains, my eyes don't look at the peaks or the sunset first. I look for the shadows. Because if you ever see a figure standing out there without a shadow, get as far away as you possibly can. Maybe, just maybe, you'll make it back alive. And that brings us to the end of our first series of true mountain horror stories. The stories you heard tonight were presented based on claimed real experiences, local folklore, and documented mysterious occurrences. Mountains offer peace, yet sometimes those very mountains hide things that defy explanation. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, please give this video a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to True Horror Vault with the bell icon turned on. Perhaps a true story sent by you will become the tale of our next terrifying episode. Until then, when the night grows deep, never stray from your path at the call of the mountains. And if you ever feel like someone is walking right behind you on a deserted trail, do not, under any circumstances, look back.